She married a billionaire who was on death's doorstep, but she didn't know how it would turn out. Subscribe channel to not miss new videos. Write in the comments where you watch. People whispered, speculated, even judged, but the truth was far more complicated than anyone could have guessed. It started with Olivia. She wasn't the kind of person you'd expect in a billionaire's orbit. No designer labels, no expensive jewelry, just a woman trying to make ends meet. She had grown up in a small town, worked 2 jobs to support her mother, and had never imagined stepping into a world of private jets and penthouse suites. But fate had other plans. Victor Langley was a name people spoke with either admiration or resentment. A self-made billionaire, a man who had turned nothing into an empire, and now dying. The tabloids painted him as ruthless, a businessman who never took no for an answer. But Olivia met a different man, a man who was tired, lonely, and facing the one thing money couldn't fix. Their paths crossed at the hospital. Olivia worked there, not as a doctor or a nurse, but as an assistant in patient services. She didn't even know who he was at first. He was just another patient with tired eyes and a quiet sadness about him. She was the one who brought him his meals, checked in on him when the nurses were too busy, and sometimes just sat in the silence when words felt unnecessary. He noticed her, not in the way powerful men notice women at gala events or in boardrooms, but in a way that felt human. She didn't treat him like a billionaire or a dying man or a news headline. She treated him like a person, and that changed everything. So when Victor asked her to marry him, people assumed the worst. They said she was after his money, that she had manipulated him in his weakest moment. But what they didn't know, what no one had cared to ask, was why he had really proposed. Olivia didn't say yes right away. How could she? Marrying a man she barely knew, a billionaire no less, sounded like something out of a ridiculous movie. But Victor wasn't asking for love, not even companionship. He was asking for honesty. He told her the truth, raw and unfiltered. He had no family left, no one he trusted with the empire he built from the ground up. Everyone around him had an agenda. Olivia was the first person in years who looked at him without seeing dollar signs. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't heartless, but she also wasn't naive. People would tear her apart, call her a gold digger, say she was waiting for him to die so she could take everything. But Victor, he wasn't worried about that. He had already planned his legacy, his fortune, his businesses, everything. He wasn't asking her to be a billionaire's widow. He was asking her to be a friend in his last days, to make sure his money didn't end up in the wrong hands, to be the one person in his life without a hidden motive. It sounded insane. Olivia wrestled with it for days. Every time she saw him, sitting by the window in his hospital room, staring out like he was waiting for the world to forget him, something in her chest ached. He wasn't just some ruthless businessman anymore. He was just a man who was scared, alone, and running out of time. So she said yes. The wedding was quiet, almost secret, no extravagant dress, no fancy venue, just a simple ceremony in Victor's home with a few witnesses. The news broke within hours. Reporters swarmed, headlines screamed, and social media exploded. Young beauty marries dying billionaire, pure love or ultimate scam. Olivia barely had time to breathe before the messages poured in. Strangers called her every name in the book. People from her past suddenly wanted to reconnect. And even hospital staff whispered when she walked by. Victor, though, he just laughed. Let them talk, he said. They don't know a damn thing. Olivia tried to ignore the chaos, but it was everywhere. Reporters camped outside, cameras flashing every time she stepped out. People who never cared about Victor's life suddenly had opinions about his marriage. His business partners, lawyers, even former acquaintances, all of them questioned her, doubted her, acted like she was some villain in a twisted story they made up. But Victor, he never wavered. Every night they sat together, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about nothing and everything. He told her stories about his life, the struggles he faced before he had money, the people who betrayed him, the ones who only saw him as a walking bank. Olivia listened, really listened, and she realized something. Victor Langley had spent his whole life winning, but in the end, he had no one to share it with. She started to see the little things, the way he hid his pain behind sarcastic remarks, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking, The way he avoided talking about what came next, as if saying it out loud would make it real. He wasn't scared of dying. He was scared of dying alone. So Olivia stayed, not because of the money, not because of what people assumed, but because she couldn't bear the thought of him leaving this world thinking no one truly cared. She made him laugh when the weight of everything got too heavy, brought him outside when he felt trapped, sat beside him when the nights got too long, and then something unexpected happened. Victor started fighting harder. The doctors were clear, his condition wasn't curable. But he wasn't ready to go just yet. He pushed through treatments, ignored the statistics, and did something no one expected. He lived longer than they predicted. Long enough for people to start questioning everything again. Was he really dying? Was this all a lie? Olivia wanted to scream. People were so obsessed with their theories, they didn't see what was right in front of them. A man who simply wanted to hold on to life for a little longer. The rumors only got worse. Some said Olivia had tricked Victor into rewriting his will, that she was feeding him some miracle cure to keep him alive just long enough to take everything. Others claimed he was never sick at all, that the whole thing had been a publicity stunt. Olivia couldn't believe it. The man was literally fighting for his life, and people still found a way to twist it into a conspiracy. Victor, as always, didn't care. Let them talk, he repeated like it was his personal mantra. But Olivia could see it, how exhausted he was, not just from the illness, but from the world refusing to let him have peace. His business partner started calling more often, questioning his decisions. Lawyers wanted to review his estate plans. Everyone was circling like vultures, waiting for him to go so they could pick apart whatever was left. But Victor wasn't done yet. One evening, sitting in his study, he looked at Olivia and said something that sent chills down her spine. "I think I finally understand," he murmured. "It was never about the money, the power, the empire. I spent my whole life building something, thinking it would mean something. But the second people thought I was dying, all they saw was an opportunity." She wanted to argue, tell him he was more than that his life had value beyond what he built. But how could she? He had spent decades surrounded by people who only cared about what they could take from him. Olivia was probably the first person in years who didn't want anything from him, and maybe that's why he had trusted her so much. Then came the final blow, a leaked document. Someone, probably one of the many snakes in his circle, managed to get their hands on his estate plans, twisting them to make it seem like Olivia was set to inherit everything. The headlines exploded. "Dying billionaire leaves entire fortune to young wife." Was this the plan all along? The backlash was immediate. People who had never even met Victor called her a manipulator, a fraud, a woman who had seduced an old man in his weakest moment. Olivia felt sick. She had never cared about his money, never even asked what would happen to it. But the world had already made up its mind. And for the first time, she saw Victor truly angry. Not at her, not at the rumors, but at the fact that even in his final days, he wasn't allowed to just be a man. "They've already decided who I am," he said bitterly, "and nothing I do will ever change that." Olivia wanted to scream. She wanted to grab every reporter, every so-called insider spreading lies, and make them see the truth. But what was the point? No one wanted the truth. They wanted a story, a scandal, a villain. And somehow she had become exactly that in their eyes. Victor, though, had other plans. If the world wanted to make assumptions, fine, let them. He wasn't going to waste his last days trying to convince people who had already made up their minds. Instead, he did what no one expected. He started giving his fortune away, quietly, without announcements, without public displays. He set up scholarships, funded medical research, and donated to causes he actually cared about, not just the ones that made for a good headline. Every time Olivia walked into his study, there were new documents, new names, new ways he was making sure his money didn't just end up in the hands of people who never cared about him. And then one night, as she sat beside him, he reached for her hand and squeezed it. "They're going to hate you no matter what," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "So make sure they hate you for the right reason." She didn't understand at first. But then, the next morning she did. The headlines exploded again, but this time it wasn't about her, it was about Victor. Somehow he had managed to make one final statement before the world could write his ending for him. In a carefully prepared message, He announced exactly where his money was going. He exposed the people who had tried to manipulate him, the ones who had waited for him to die just so they could get their share. He named names. He burned bridges. And in the very last line, he wrote something that made Olivia's chest tighten. I didn't marry Olivia because I was dying. I married her because for the first time in my life, someone saw me as a person, not a price tag, and that is something no amount of money can buy. The backlash was immediate. His former associates were furious. Lawsuits were threatened. The media scrambled to rewrite their narratives, but none of it mattered because the truth was finally out. And 2 days later, Victor Langley was gone. Olivia sat in the quiet house, the weight of everything settling over her. She had spent so much time fighting for Victor, protecting him, standing by him. Now he was gone, and the world wanted to know what she would do next. She could already hear the whispers. Will she contest the will? Did she secretly get a payout? What's her next move? She smiled bitterly. Let them wonder. Because the only person whose opinion had ever mattered was no longer here. And she wasn't about to waste another second proving herself to people who never cared to begin with. Thanks for watching.